a couple of thoughts this morning as we prepare ourselves for communion. The first one is a thought about inclusion. One of the challenges of doing communion is trying to figure out who is and who isn't supposed to take communion, who belongs here and who doesn't. And there are sort of two basic ways of doing this. The typical way to do this is to develop a systematic theology where you sort of get all of your ideas in a logical kind of sequence so that by the time you get to the question of communion, you know what your answer is likely to be. So you start with an understanding of what salvation is and how salvation actually works. And then you probably want to go to some sort of understanding of exactly what ritual is and how ritual works, and specifically this ritual. So what does it mean that this is the body and the blood of Christ, and who is worthy to actually handle the body of Christ? And so at the end of this process, you probably come to at least some sort of common understanding, so that in a particular church, whether it's the denomination or a particular congregation, you'd be able to say to yourself, well, these are the people who should be taking communion and those who shouldn't. And this is worked out in many different ways, in many different congregations. And that is what it is, I guess. The second and much more simple way of figuring out who belongs is to read the text. And the text says that Jesus is having supper with his disciples, and he predicts that Judas is going to betray him, and he makes sure that Judas knows that he knows. And Jesus says, yes. Doesn't actually say yes. He says, you have said so, but it's sort of like, you and I both know, Judas, who is going to do this? Who is going to betray me so that I will be tortured to death? And then Jesus offers communion to Judas. Wow. First, Jesus acknowledges, yes, Judas, you are about to betray me, so I will be tortured to death. And then Jesus offers Judas his body and his blood to share. So that's my general rule. Even if you have knowingly this week betrayed the Son of God to death, you are welcome. If you can imagine something worse than that, and you've done that particular thing this week, you don't have to worry about that yourself. But unless you've done something worse than betraying the Son of God to death, you are welcome here at the table. And usually, right, when we see this in pictures, it's Jesus and a bunch of guys gathered around this table. Right? Well, first of all, the table was probably about that size, and they're not gathered around it. Who knows how they're scattered. Right? Because this is an old story, and the old storytellers, they basically just told stories about guys. And they didn't bother telling the story about everybody else who was there. But the chances that there were no women there is probably statistically zero, because somebody actually had to do the cooking and the preparing and the serving and all of this stuff. And the chances that there were no children there is probably statistically also very close to zero, because all these disciples are married and they've all got kids. We don't think about that, but that's, very, very, very likely. And the chances that all these kids aren't there is, again, very close to zero. Right? So, the exclusion of children also does not make sense to me. So that's my standard for inclusion and exclusion. And I think that is generally the practice here in this congregation. But if you do not wish to participate, That is fine. That is up to you. The second thing I want to quickly notice is the simplicity of the way Matthew talks about the event. Jesus took a loaf of bread. So what kind of bread? We could presume it was unleavened bread, but when you see the very, very, very earliest pictures of the early church and communion, it's never unleavened bread. It's always just regular bread. It looks very much like that, the early pictures. So it's just like he took bread and he blessed it, and what did he say? Don't know. And then he broke it. And how did he do that? So the description is extremely simple, and this is fairly typical in the Bible, that when the Bible describes ritual, the descriptions are very, very simple. And I don't know why this is, but the effect of it is that you can do this in thousands of different ways, and they're all correct. It's pretty hard to do this wrong. Right? And churches spend thousands of hours trying to figure out exactly how to do this correctly, when really, biblically, there's almost no way to do this wrong. Now, Paul in 1 Corinthians is going to explain to his church that they're doing this wrong, but they're doing some really dumb things. Right? So it is possible to do this wrong, but you've got to be pretty significantly dumb to do this significantly wrong. So that is the beauty of the simplicity of this event. Right, that we are going to celebrate communion together, and it's going to be very simple because it was originally, and we're going to do it correctly because whatever we do, we don't know what kind of bread, right? We don't even know. I mean, we think it's probably wine because it talks about fruit of the vine, but all it says is he took a cup. And, you know, in that culture, we can probably assume wine. It does talk about fruit of the vine later, but there's long discussions in Ghana about hard wine versus soft wine. I tried to explain this to them. They like this. Anyway, right? So I invite you this morning to come and join me. What we're going to do this morning is we're going to gather together in a circle. So we're going to have to sort of use one of the pews as, right, maybe we should take out another cute Corey's. Got my screwdriver. Anyway, right, so we're just going to gather together in a circle, and we're going to bless the bread, and we're going to pass it around, and we're going to hold it until everyone has, and then we're going to all eat together. And then we're going to do the same with the little couplets of wine, and so that we can do this together, because it's a good size for being able to do it all together. So if you'd like to come forward and join me, as long as you haven't betrayed anyone to death for the last 24 hours, you're okay.